This is a tiny nitpick that completely breaks immersion for me, and I would love it if I never saw it again. Hello, I'm Claire, and I like some books. Science fiction, when done right, is my favorite genre. That is why it's especially painful to me when characters in sci-fi settings invent new elements. Admittedly, I have only two examples of this ever happening. One is a book, one is a movie. But in both cases, a tiny, incy change would have avoided the problem in its entirety. What is the problem? Why a sci-fi novel, You're Going to Mars, by Rob Dirks, kept using element and two other words that I cannot now recall, I read this book years ago, as synonyms. They are not synonyms. The word element, as defined in chemistry, does not have a synonym. Interchangeably using element and solid does not make the author sound clever for avoiding to use the same word over and over again. It shows us that the author does not know their chemistry or physics basics. Which is a thing I might be able to forgive in a memoir or a historical novel, but not in a science fiction story. Yes, it's still fiction, but if you break the laws of physics in a sci-fi story, the plot needs to deal with that. So why can't authors, or anyone else for that matter, invent new elements? First, inventing makes no sense whatsoever in this context. Elements aren't gadgets that you invent. They can only be discovered. Second, and more importantly, we know what an element is, how many there are, and their properties. They are all nicely documented in the periodic table of elements. Why can't you trust atoms? Because they make up everything. Everything around me and you is made out of atoms. An atom is the smallest possible amount of matter which still retains its identity as a chemical element. Here's the thought experiment. If I took a chunk of pure iron, split it in half, I would get two smaller chunks of iron. Now I take one of those smaller chunks, split it again in half, and get even smaller chunks of iron. If I do this process again and again, the question becomes, is there a point in which splitting would result in two chunks of something else, something that's not iron? Yes, there is. It's called an atom. Atoms consist of a nucleus that's surrounded by a cloud of electrons. The electrons whiz around doing their own thing. They are very important for very many things, but not in this context, so we can ignore them. We are interested in the nucleus. That's where the elemental magic is. It consists of protons and neutrons bunched up together. You can envision them as small balls glued together into a larger ballish shape. That will be accurate enough for our purposes. The only thing that determines which element the atom represents is the number of protons in the nucleus. Not their position, not who they want to be glued next to, just their number. 1, 2, 3, so on. You can't have 4.7 protons in a nucleus, nor can you have 0 because then you don't have a nucleus. The consequence of this is that you literally can count the elements and assign each of them a number corresponding to the number of protons in their nucleus. We call that number the atomic number. In the periodic table, you can kind of see how many elements there are. I say kind of because around the number 100-ish, we get to the synthetic elements. We haven't found them in nature, we have created them in a lab. Some of them are so unstable that they decay after a fraction of a second. So do you really want to count that as the element existing or not? It's like, we can debate that. But that leads us straight to, if someone were to discover a new stable element, that would be wild. The physicists and the chemists would be all over that. What atomic number is it? What are its exact properties? How does it fit in our current understanding of the world? This is not a thing you can just mention and then pretend like it's not a big deal. It would be like finding a person on the internet who has all the wrong views on your favorite book, and you then ignoring and forgetting about it. No, this is not how the internet works. You need to get in there and explain in excruciating detail just exactly why that person is wrong. Having said all of that, there are situations in which it would make sense for the characters to discover new elements. In fantasy settings, the elements rarely follow the scientific definition. So when authors add blood as a sub-element of water or discover a new dark element, that's completely fine. In those contexts, the word element clearly refers to something else than what I am talking about here. However, in a science fiction story, I will assume you mean the chemical definition of an element. This doesn't preclude authors from writing about the discovery of new elements, but the discovery will have to play a major role in the story. Remember, discovering a new incorrect opinion is hard to ignore. If the author would rather not bother with that whole plotline and they just need a material with ultra mega super cool awesome properties, then I have an ultra mega super cool awesome fix for you. Just call it a material. That's literally it. Nothing else needs to change. The author could give it a name and then alternately refer to it by name and the word material. The editor will have nothing to complain about and the whole world can rejoice. Especially me. To make me personally even more happy than that, it would be great if the author never mentioned how the material is produced or what it's made of. The less explanation I get here, the better. If the author wants to be all fancy schmancy about it, they could also go with alloy, ceramic, polycarbonate, or something else I'm forgetting here. They would just need to be a bit more careful with those because they do have a more specific meaning than just material. Now I'm ready to tell you about the movie example. In Iron Man 2, Tony Stark invents a new element by rearranging the protons and neutrons inside the atom's core. Having just heard me blab about how the only thing that's important for what constitutes an element, how do you feel about what the billionaire genius did there? I can tell you that I laughed out loud in the cinema, and not in a good way. I believe that if you want to write sci-fi, you should know the basics of the hard sciences. Just like you would need to know the basics of history when writing a history novel, or the basics of anatomy when writing a romance novel. So even though this whole video is about a paper cut, it's also a hill that I'm willing to die on. Until the next time you click on one of my videos, bye-bye. You're still here? Then you get a book recommendation. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir is one of the best, if not the best, sci-fi novel ever written. I like to call it Friendship is Magic in Space. It is my strong opinion that you need to go into this book completely blind, so I won't tell you anything else about it, apart from how it relates to this video. The main character interacts with a new material, and Andy is clever enough to refer to it as a material the whole way. Not once does he slip and call it an element. I highly recommend, especially the audiobook, to anyone who likes optimistic sci-fi. And while you're here, the movie based on Project Hail Mary is coming out. Do not watch the trailer. Do not rob yourself of the unspoiled experience of discovering Redacted